ocean prawny greenest, the never-ending sea. Don't mess with squirmy jellyfish, but do not mess with me. Oh, do not mess with me.
HICCUP the Viking Who Was Seasick by Cressida Cowell. Long ago, in a fierce and frosty land, there lived a small and lonely Viking, and his name was HICCUP. Vikings were enormous, roaring burglars with bristling moustaches who sailed all over the world and took whatever they wanted. HICCUP was tiny and thoughtful and polite. The other Viking children wouldn't let him join in their rough Viking games. HICCUP was frightened of spiders, he's frightened of thunder, he's frightened of sudden loud noises. But most of all, HICCUP was frightened of going to sea for the very first time next Tuesday. HICCUP wasn't sure he was a Viking at all. HICCUP's father was Stoic the Vast. Wherever Stoic walked, the ground trembled, flowers wilted and bunnies fainted. He hadn't brushed his beard in 30 years. "Only girlies brush their beards," boomed Stoic the Vast. "Girlies don't have beards," HICCUP pointed out, but no one listened to him. And when HICCUP told his father he was frightened of going to sea, Stoic laughed his enormous Viking laugh until the salty tears ran down to his enormous hairy feet. "You can't be frightened, little HICCUP. Vikings don't get frightened." And he sang the Viking song. "I have blacked 1,000 eyes of 1,000 angry gales. Watch me knock the cockles off the biggest bluest whales. I have given the walrus nightmares who thought they were strong. I marooned a huge typhoon on an island off Hong Kong." "Oh, ancient prawny greenest, the never-ending sea. Go mess with squirmy jellyfish, but do not mess with me. But do not mess with me." He patted HICCUP on the head and went off to do 300 press-ups before breakfast. "Ooh," thought HICCUP, "it all sounds very dangerous." So HICCUP went to see the oldest Viking of all, old Wrinkly himself, whose barnacled beard fell down to his toes. "Your saltiness," he whispered, for HICCUP had beautiful manners. "Do Vikings ever get frightened?" "Little grandson," wheezed old Wrinkly, and his breath was like being kissed by mackerel. "I've been wondering about the answer to that question myself. The sea is full of trials and terrors, but it's also full of marvels and miracles. Go to sea and you can tell me if Vikings ever get frightened." So at 8:45 on a breezy Tuesday, HICCUP went to sea for the very first time. At 9:30, HICCUP was wishing he hadn't eaten those 2 smallish haddock for breakfast. At 9:45, he was feeling very peculiar indeed, and at 10:30 he wished he was dead. "I feel seasick," he said to his father. "Vikings don't get seasick," said Stoic the Vast. But this one was all over Stoic's feet. HICCUP got sicker and sicker, and the storm got wilder and wilder. Stoic the Vast sang the Viking song at the storm. I have blacked 1,000 eyes of 1,000 angry gales. Watch me knock the cockles off the biggest, bluest whales. But the storm took no notice, and a great wave came up and soaked him. One mighty wave picked up that whole Viking ship as if it were a matchstick, and threw it 50 miles to the south. And one mighty blast from the gale picked up that whole Viking ship as if it were a piece of seaweed. As if it were a piece of seaweed, and threw it 50 miles to the east, to the west. And a terrible black wind went shrieking all over the lonely ocean and turned that Viking ship upside down and inside out, and went shivering down every single Viking's spine. Well lost, said Stoic the not-so-vast, after all, and a funny thing happened. His face began to turn a greenish hue, and he thought of the 37 largish haddock he'd had for breakfast, and his stomach began to heave. And then all the Vikings turned a pretty green colour, and their stomachs heaved, and with an almighty rush they ran to the side. Well, well, said Hiccup, it appears that Vikings do get seasick. And immediately he began to feel better. This direction, shouted Hiccup. But the Vikings were too busy being seasick to steer the boat, so Hiccup began to take charge, and a funny thing happened. The more he steered, the better he felt. As he headed for home, that stormy wind filled the sails, and the boat skimmed over the ocean at 1,000 miles an hour. Out of the depths of the sea came shoals of flying fish and leaping dolphins and strange whales with horns like unicorns. There were eels that lit up like light bulbs, and nameless things with enormous eyes that no one had ever seen before, all following Hiccup the Viking as he steered that ship towards home at tremendous speed. Nice breezy day, hummed Hiccup as he steered into harbour. So tell me, said old Wrinkly, and his old whelk eyes might have been twinkling. Do Vikings ever get frightened? Sometimes they do, said Stoic the Vast. But they get over it, said Hiccup the Viking. That's what makes them so brave. The end.